Howdy, guys. Jimmy Song here for Off Chain. I got back from Satoshi Roundtable in the last 24 hours. Just have to say, my body pays a toll every time I go to these conferences. You know, you're up all night. Well, not all night, but you're up pretty late. You're drinking sometimes, and you make videos that Max Kaiser puts on his Twitter stream. Anyway, lots of things happen, and you generally don't get that much sleep, and you're having to be up early so you can like attend all of the different interesting things. So at least for me, I just need like a whole day to recover, and I've been trying to recover. I think I slept like 12 hours, which feels awesome. Should try to do that if you can. Definitely heals your body a little bit. I also needed to detox. I had some sugar. That felt awful. I'm not sure if it was the alcohol or the sugar that made me feel bad. My hypothesis is that they both sort of have like a similar effect on my body, and I just feel awful the next day, or just feel super lazy and not productive. And cutting sugar and alcohol out of my life for long stretches of time tends to help in that regard. I can put out a lot of content for you guys. I can write code and work on my programming blockchain seminars, or the book, or this thing we're setting up at Blockchain Capital. Lots of different things. Obviously, doing all of that requires a lot of energy, and that means that I got to stay off the sugar, the sauce. So yeah, I'm paying for it right now. I think I've mostly detoxed. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about proof of stake. So I've been getting this question quite a bit, and this is pretty much every city I've visited. So, Charlotte, London, Amsterdam, Tel Aviv, even down in Mexico. I get this question a lot. How can we justify proof of work when there's this proof of stake thing? Right, like at least in the minds of the people that are asking me, they're saying, "Hey, we're wasting all of this electricity, and where we could go to this other thing that doesn't cost us anything, and therefore is much better." And I didn't really take that argument very seriously, because I've done some analysis, and I was like, well, okay, it sounds really good, proof of stake, but the work still has to come from somewhere, right? Like economically, if it costs, if it's worth some amount of cryptocurrency to actually produce, well, that's what the price is going to get to, and human action, or some form of human effort is going to go towards getting that, whether it's in the form of electricity, or creating miners, or versus getting loans and grinding stake and stuff like that. Those are all sort of like concerns that you should have about proof of stake, but I don't think a lot of people know about that. So in this video, my purpose is to just sort of talk through exactly what proof of stake is, and why it doesn't really make any sense. First of all, there are a couple of different proof of stake things that you need to know about. First is sort of like the very pure proof of stake, and this means that all of the coins are sort of created at the beginning, and then sort of distributed, and whoever wants to stake their coins, they sort of lock up their coins for some period of time, and in exchange for that, they get to get some of the transaction fees. They also get to compose the blocks, right? And they get to get transaction fees out of each block. And it sounds good, except it's not actually that secure, right? Well, we'll get to that in a second, but that's more or less it. Like you have say there's a million coins being staked. If you have like 10,000 coins that you're staking personally, you have a 1% chance of getting the stake. That's getting the transaction fees, and that's sort of the idea behind it. And of course, in order to actually stake, you need to make sure that you're composing the blocks and stuff on a timely manner. Otherwise, there's all this fallover and stuff like that. Great. The other sort of proof of stake, and this is sort of more Ethereum's thing, is instead of just transaction fees, you already have sort of like this distribution of Ethereum already. So from at least as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong. You stake your coins, and this is the whole Casper thing. You stake your coins, and you get a chance not just at the transaction fee, but also some sort of what would have been the miner reward. This is like the staking reward, right? And that way sort of continues to increase from a their inflation schedule continues unabated. If you don't know, Ethereum has a constant inflation. So, it trends towards infinity, but as a percentage, it decreases every year asymptotically, something like that. But anyway, that's what they're trying to do. And so I wanted to talk about it because there's this perception that proof of stake, you get all of the benefits of proof of work without any of the cost. And that's just simply not true. So let's talk about it. So from a security perspective, there's a lot of worrying things. It's not secured by anything, right? Like, you have like a single signature, and if you wanted to, so in order to sort of like choose who's going to get that reward, you have like, if you have 10,000 coins in a million coin stake, total stake, you have like a 1% chance. If you are selected, then great, you get that reward. So it's sort of like random, right? So where does that randomness come from? Like, how do you determine who gets that, like which person you choose? And usually they use some form of entropy, like the Merkle root or whatever. And it turns out that is gameable, right? Like, and this is Andrew Poelstra's stake grinding technique, which more or less devolves proof of stake to proof of work, which is that you can change the Merkle root. You can add a new transaction. You can change your transaction. You can do lots of things to a transaction, and more or less change the Merkle root, and therefore create a new randomness. And you can try that randomness until you get the stake. So it's actually not secure, because even though you sign the block or whatever, somebody can sort of go back in history and change it so that they are the ones that have the right to compose that block. So you can game it in such a way where you can like just reorg a lot of history. And at this point, you might be saying, well, can't we do something about that, right? Like, like if there's 100 block reorg, there's this social community that's going to say, well, you're obviously trying to stake grind. We're going to get rid of you, and we're going to make sure that this fork is the one that we, the legitimate fork, the one that we think is correct, is going to go on. Fine, okay, maybe 100 block reorg won't happen, but that also gives up a very, very big property, which is that you are no longer really decentralized. It's more or less based on somebody saying, "Hey, this is the correct chain," or whatever, and that can be kind of problematic. Also, if you are sort of going on a block by block basis, you can sort of stake grind in a way as to not make it obvious that you are sort of stake grinding. You can make you can have like 5 different potential blocks where you win all of them on different portions, and nobody really knows that you are stake grinding. It looks like all of them are more or less legitimate. So I mean, there's lots of ways in which that can happen. And the thing about stake grinding is that it's almost exactly the same as proof of work. You have to go through like more or less a nonce of a transaction. So you change it slightly so that the Merkle root changes, and so that your stake is the one that gets picked. So it's interesting, but it's not really secure. So that's like a major objection. With proof of work, what you have is an objective thing. You have to get the hash of the block header to be below a certain number, And it's very, very difficult to produce. To do a 100-block rework takes an enormous amount of computing power, and there's no way. There probably is a way, but it just costs so much money that that same amount of money can be utilized on the Bitcoin blockchain, and you can just make the mining reward, and it's not worth going back. But with proof of stake, it's totally worth going back, because it doesn't. It just you just have to grind out a few nonces. So in a way, it's not really that secure, and we've gone through this from, like, I think Peercoin was, like, at least conceptually there, like, starting in 2010, and nobody's really figured out a way to fix that without, like, sort of some centralization force, either some sort of, like, hey, we're the authority here, and, like, this is what Ripple does. We're the authority, and we're going to more or less tell you which one's the correct way to go. And that's highly centralized, right? Like, if that's the kind of currency you want, that's the currency you can get. Of course, that means that you are beholden to whatever Ripple says, right? Like, if they want to take away your ripples, or if they want to say you don't want to do whatever, then we don't like this transaction, we're going to reverse it. I mean, that's up to you, right? I don't see how that's really that different than central banking or, like, fiat system. But I mean, that is a legitimate way that you can go, but it doesn't have the same properties as Bitcoin. And proof of stake more or less devolves to that case if you want it to be secure, because you need some sort of way to determine which chain is legitimate. And at least with Bitcoin, there is a legitimate way. It's utilizing something like, it's utilizing proof of work, which is very, very difficult to construct. Proof of stake is very easy to construct, so you can fake it very easily. And you either have to rely on the goodwill of everybody else, which is not a good idea on an adversarial network, or you have to, more or less like, trust the central authority of something of some kind, which kind of defeats the purpose. Then again, I guess if you're an altcoin, that's kind of what you're already doing. You have a creator or somebody that usually sort of dictates where you're going to go with everything. So in many ways, I just don't trust proof of stake. So that's sort of on the security side. Let's talk about the economic side, and this is the one that bothers me more, actually. A lot of people seem to think that you get proof of stake for free, and this is not true. Even if you could come up with some sort of system where you have, proof of stake, and somebody, a lot of people are staking, and they have a chance at the fee reward or whatever. The cost of creating that block, or the reward for creating that block, is some amount. Say, like, it's $1,000 worth of whatever currency. In Bitcoin, obviously, it's 12.5 Bitcoins plus whatever fees. And the long-term trend line is that the cost of creating a block will trend towards the reward of that block. Right? That's just how economics goes. If in any sort of commoditized thing, and Bitcoin blocks are definitely commoditized. Stakes, it does the same thing. If it's $1,000 per block, then people are going to spend up to $1,000 to create it. And you can certainly use something like stake grinding, but you can also do other things, right? Like, you can go and get, like, if say the coin locks your coins up for a year, you can also get loans and, like, provide liquidity for people that want to stake for shorter amounts of time. And those are all costs, right? Like, you have to, like, go and get people to loan you those amounts, and provide them liquidity at the right time and things like that. The economic activity required to get to that is still going to be the same. And like, people say, oh well, but we're wasting all this electricity. Well, you're also wasting a lot of time and money and people's effort in staking as well. Like, if the reward is $1,000, people are going to spend up to $1,000 to get that reward. That's just economic reality. That's market dynamics. And if you don't think there's any way that they can do that then you lack imagination and you lack an entrepreneurial mindset, because that's exactly how these things shake out. So basically, it's a lot like kind of like electric cars or something like that, where people sort of feel good that the last step doesn't necessarily pollute as much, but you're not looking at the rest of the economic activity that came before it, right? Yeah, gasoline pollutes more than electric car at the very last step, but that's about the only step you're counting if you're saying electric vehicles are superior to gasoline. Where does the electricity for the car come from, right? How was the battery for the electric car manufactured? Like there's all sorts of other costs to making that car, and all sorts of economic activity that happened beforehand that you are not aware of. It just makes you feel good because the very last step happens to be a little more efficient. You have no idea if all of the steps beforehand were more efficient or not. And this is a common problem in economics, is that people only think about what they can see and not what they can't see. And the great thing about markets is that you have prices. Prices tell you exactly how much something costs from an economic activity perspective. And this is really the only objective metric that you have to determine whether or not something is actually good for the economy or not. If it's cheap, you're going to tend to buy more of it, right? Like if it's too expensive, you're going to buy less. That's just how it is. And like electric cars have sort of I like electric cars, don't get me wrong, right? Like but like to say it's better for the environment is a blanket statement that you can't make without knowing all of the steps that happen in between. And proof of stake is very much like that. You don't know what led the person to have that amount to stake, and you don't know what like shenanigans they have to go through to get whatever it is. So in many ways, it's just sort of proof of stake ends up being sort of a very obscure proof of work, whereas proof of work is pretty transparent, right? Would you rather have a transparent thing or an obscure thing? Proof of work is very nice in the sense that you know exactly how much it costs, right? Like the capital costs of the miner, the costs of electricity, or more or less you can guess at them and things like that. So how much economic activity it took. And the transparency encourages more people to come out. With something that's more obscured, like proof of stake, that's not the case. Now, that said, Decred has something interesting that's like a hybrid proof of work and proof of stake, and they use proof of stake for something completely different, and this is voting. So for that reason, I think there is a future for proof of stake. But for actual creation of blocks, I don't think proof of stake works. Anyway, all right, let's see. Electric vehicles are superior even with the external costs. Maybe they are, but you're gonna have to show me more numbers than just, okay, well, studies prove that. Like, I mean, I'm not even sure how you do a study like that, right? Like you're gonna have to get the cost of materials and the environmental impact of all of those materials. See, when you start thinking about environmental impact and things like that, you're sort of creating two new prices. You have the market price of the actual good, and electric vehicles in general cost more than gasoline vehicles, but that's just one aspect of cost. If you have sort of like the second cost that you're thinking of, which is what's the environmental impact of the dollars that I'm spending, well, then you're going to have to calculate that second cost as well, and that is not at all obvious and highly subjective to many people. Like you can say, okay, well, this tire, well, probably the tires are the same, right, on both, so the environmental impact is probably the same, but there's a much bigger battery in one than the other. Okay, what's the environmental impact of that battery? Well, that's kind of subjective, right? Like, do you some of the materials for the battery come in some place from Canada or whatever? Is it endangering the wildlife there? We don't really, I don't know. Like a lot of this stuff is like only determinable on like 100 or 1,000-year timescales, not like immediately. It's okay, well, is it poisoning a well? Well, yeah, that stuff is like a little more little easier. But you know, a lot of the environmental impact of some of these things, you know, these are costs that you can't really. Environmental price is not obvious, is my point. Like I said, I like electric vehicles. You know, my sister owns one. They have a great time with it. I think they're great, and you know, but it's a calculation you have to make, and most people make it based on a market price thing, because you pay a little more upfront, but you pay less sort of going forward. The emotional sort of, hey, I'm polluting the environment less. I don't think that's obvious at all, right? Like and you know, maybe there are studies that say one thing or say something else, but it's not obvious at all, and it's highly subjective, and you know, price is the only real objective metric that we have. Anyway, lots of interesting comments going on over there. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video to talk about that a little bit. Tangible, yeah, it's not tangible. Yeah, that is the word I was looking for. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to go hard on working on the book the next 2 weeks, so that's going to be my thing. I really need to do that before the Tampa seminar, and then and then there's like spring break where I'm gonna have to take my family somewhere, and then after that I'm gonna be in Hong Kong for programming blockchain there. By the way, I think there's like only like a week and a half left before, you know, prices go up on that, so please sign up if you're interested. Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out if I can get like somewhere, a hotel in Seoul right after Hong Kong, and you know, try to do my seminar there. So that's coming up. I'm probably gonna, yeah, there's a lot of other things I need to do as well, which is why I can't eat sugar. I can't drink alcohol. Those things all like ruin me for like a whole day. So anyway, good things. Thank you guys for watching. You know, I have my black hat on because, you know, it was, you know, kind of challenging some things. So anyway, thank you for, you know, watching and being with me on these shows. I appreciate all of you, and I can't believe I get to do this for a living. Anyway, thank you. And this song is done.